Welcome back to American Scandal Report by Skoob. I'm your host, Oz Dalton, and today we're unraveling one of the most contested and consequential investigations in American history. This isn't just a story about an assassination, it's about narrative control, shattered public trust, and a government scrambling to stitch together a version of truth that the nation could live with, even if it didn't add up. This is the Warren Commission, the official inquiry into the death of President John F. Kennedy. Born in the chaos that followed that fatal motorcade in Dallas, the Commission was tasked with giving America answers. What it gave instead were decades of doubt. From the so called lone gunman theory to missing evidence, sealed testimonies, and suspicious deaths of key witnesses, the Warren Report left behind a trail of inconsistencies that conspiracy theorists and serious investigators have followed ever since. But what if the confusion wasn't just incompetence, but by design? What you're about to hear is more than a rehash of old footage and familiar grainy photos. This is a story of Cold War paranoia, institutional fear, and the delicate balancing act of maintaining order when the truth might do the opposite. It's about power behind the curtain and what happens when that power chooses silence over transparency. We'll examine the official record and then we'll go further into the lost testimonies, the altered timelines, and the political pressures that may have shaped the findings long before a single interview was conducted. From CIA secrets and mob ties to the possibility of a cover up at the highest levels of government, this is the story America was told and the one it wasn't. This is the truth behind the Warren Commission. And if even part of the alternative narrative holds water, then what we thought we knew about one of the darkest days in American history might be more fiction than fact. Stay with us. Because when it comes to scandal, sometimes the cover up isn't just part of the story. It is the story. Picture this. It's November 1963, and America is reeling. President Lyndon Baines Johnson has just inherited not only the presidency, but a national crisis that threatens to tear the country apart. Rumors are swirling. Was this a communist plot? A coup? The work of a lone madman? Johnson knew he had to act fast and act decisively. Enter the Warren Commission, 7 men tasked with finding the truth in what would become one of the most scrutinized investigations in American history. But here's where it gets interesting. The composition of this commission would later fuel conspiracy theories for decades. Leading the charge was Supreme Court Chief Justice Earl Warren himself, a man whose liberal rulings had already made him controversial in certain circles. But it was the other appointments that really raised eyebrows. We had Senators Richard Russell from Georgia and John Sherman Cooper from Kentucky, Representatives Hale Boggs from Louisiana, and Gerald Ford from Michigan. Ford, by the way, would later become the 38th President of the United States, despite never being elected as either Vice President or President. A fascinating footnote to American political history. But the appointments that really got conspiracy theorists blood pumping were Allen Dulles and John McCloy. Dulles was the former CIA director. Imagine having the ex-head of the spy agency investigating a case where that same agency would come under scrutiny. McCloy was a Washington power broker with connections to the World Bank and Ford Foundation. These weren't just investigators. These were establishment insiders. The commission held its first meeting on December 5th, 1963, just 13 days after the shots rang out in Dealey Plaza. Chief Justice Warren walked into that room at the National Archives with a specific vision. They were evaluators, not investigators. He believed they could simply review what the FBI, Secret Service, and CIA had already uncovered. But the other commissioners weren't buying it. They knew this was bigger than just rubber stamping someone else's work. They needed subpoena power, they needed independence, and they needed to dig deeper. The question was, would they be allowed to? Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, J. Edgar Hoover and his FBI. Hoover wasn't just the director of the FBI, he was practically an institution unto himself, a man who had dirt on presidents and wasn't afraid to use it. When the Warren Commission was formed, Hoover found himself in an impossible position. Here's what's fascinating. Hoover didn't obstruct the investigation, but he sure didn't embrace it either. William Sullivan, a former assistant FBI director, later revealed that Hoover saw the Warren Commission not as a partner in seeking truth, but as a rival, a threat to his empire. Think about it from Hoover's perspective. The FBI had already conducted their investigation and reached their conclusions. Now, here comes this blue ribbon commission, ready to second guess everything. Sullivan, speaking to investigators in 1975, painted a picture of Hoover consumed with fear. Fear that the commission would find fault with the FBI's work. Fear of embarrassment, fear of damage to his legendary reputation. But here's where it gets really juicy. According to Sullivan, Hoover had a mole on the commission itself. Gerald Ford, yes, the future president, was allegedly feeding information back to the FBI. Ford met with FBI Deputy Director DeLoach on December 12, 1963, expressing his disapproval of Warren's plan to essentially run a one-man show by appointing Warren Olney as chief counsel. Now, Ford has always denied being an FBI informant, swearing under oath that he only met with DeLoach twice in December 1963, and that was it. But the damage to perception was already done. The idea that the FBI had eyes and ears inside the commission added another layer to the conspiracy theories that would plague the investigation. On December 9th, just 17 days after the assassination, the FBI delivered their report to the Warren Commission. 5 volumes, 384 pages, with a crystal clear conclusion: Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Case closed, as far as Hoover was concerned. The Warren Commission had barely begun their work, and the FBI was essentially telling them, here's your answer, you're welcome. But here's something that might surprise you. Despite all the political machinations and institutional rivalries, the investigation that followed was absolutely massive. And I mean massive in a way that puts most criminal investigations to shame. Tom Bethel, who worked as lead researcher for New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, a man who would later become famous for his own Kennedy assassination investigation, admitted something remarkable. Even though Garrison's team was trying to prove a conspiracy, they were privately impressed by the FBI's thoroughness. Bethel said the FBI had interviewed everyone, and I mean everyone, down to people with the most tenuous connections to the case. Let me give you some examples that will blow your mind. The FBI found some guy with a shady past who happened to sit next to Lee Harvey Oswald on a bus to Mexico in September 1963. This man had virtually nothing to do with the assassination, but the FBI still produced a 99-page report on him. 99 pages on a bus passenger. Or consider this, they got all the toll call records for Jack Ruby, the nightclub owner who shot Oswald, but they didn't stop there. They also got records for Ruby's 3 brothers, 4 sisters, and 12 other people who had close contact with Ruby from September 26th through November 22nd, 1963. They were looking for any thread, any connection, any hint of conspiracy. Even Harold Weisberg, one of the most vocal Warren Commission critics, had to admit that the commission investigated almost every conceivable detail about Oswald's actions and whereabouts. This wasn't a whitewash or a cover-up in the traditional sense. This was an exhaustive examination that left virtually no stone unturned. The Warren Commission's investigation stands as one of the most thorough crime inquiries in history. When people claim the commission was incompetent or superficial, they're usually people who have never conducted a murder investigation themselves. The level of detail, the scope of inquiry, the sheer volume of evidence examined, it's staggering. After 10 months of investigation, on September 24, 1964, the Warren Commission delivered their verdict. The conclusion was definitive. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Jack Ruby acted alone. No conspiracy, foreign or domestic. Let me paint you a picture of Lee Harvey Oswald as the commission saw him. Here was a former Marine who tried to defect to the Soviet Union, came back with a Russian wife, had marginal ties to pro-Castro groups, but ultimately was just a lonely, disturbed individual with delusions of grandeur. The commission found no evidence that he was an agent or informant for the FBI, CIA, or any government body. He was, in their view, a lone wolf. And Jack Ruby? The Dallas nightclub owner with underworld connections who silenced Oswald forever with a single shot? The commission portrayed him as a man acting on impulse, motivated by a bizarre combination of patriotism, a desire to redeem Dallas's reputation, and a need to spare Jackie Kennedy the ordeal of Oswald's trial. They noted his declining mental health, his financial problems, his use of diet pills that may have triggered psychosis. The commission acknowledged they couldn't rule out every possible conspiracy. That would be impossible. But they stated clearly that any evidence of a broader plot was beyond the reach of US investigative agencies. In other words, if there was a conspiracy, we can't find it. And we've looked everywhere. Case closed, right? Not even close. Here's the thing about definitive government pronouncements. Sometimes they create more questions than answers. The Warren Commission's report was supposed to put the Kennedy assassination to rest, but it had the opposite effect. By 1966, just 2 years after the report's release, best-selling books were already challenging its conclusions. Mark Lane's Rush to Judgment and Edward J. Epstein's Inquest became cultural phenomena, poking holes in the official narrative and asking uncomfortable questions. These weren't fringe publications. These were mainstream bestsellers that millions of Americans read. The same year, New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison charged businessman Clay Shaw with conspiracy to assassinate Kennedy. Garrison's case ultimately collapsed, but not before creating a media sensation. Hollywood would later turn this story into Oliver Stone's JFK in 1991, a film that suggested Kennedy was killed by a secretive ruling class that feared his plans to withdraw from Vietnam. Then came March 6, 1975, a date that changed everything. ABC television aired the complete Zapruder film for the first time. Americans watched in horror as their president's head exploded in graphic detail, but they also saw something that troubled many. The president's head appeared to snap backward, suggesting a shot from the front, not from Oswald's position behind Kennedy. This wasn't just academic debate anymore. This was visual evidence that seemed to contradict the official story, broadcast into American living rooms in all its brutal clarity. By the mid-1970s, America was a different country than it had been in 1964. The Warren Commission had delivered its verdict in an era when Americans still trusted their government, when official pronouncements carried weight, when institutions commanded respect. But then came the avalanche. The assassinations of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. Nixon's resignation in disgrace, urban riots, and perhaps most damaging of all, revelations about government abuse of power that shattered any remaining faith in official narratives. The Senate's Church Committee exposed decades of intelligence agency misconduct, domestic spying, foreign assassinations, illegal experiments on American citizens. J. Edgar Hoover's death in 1972 opened the floodgates, revealing the extent of his surveillance state and his willingness to blackmail and intimidate American citizens, including presidents. Suddenly, those appointments to the Warren Commission looked different. Alan Dulles, the former CIA director, investigating a case where the CIA might be implicated. Hoover's FBI providing the foundational evidence. These weren't reassuring credentials anymore. They were red flags. The House Select Committee on Assassinations was convened in the late 1970s to take another look at the Kennedy case. The nation that had initially accepted the Warren Commission's findings was now demanding answers to questions that had been dismissed a decade earlier. Here's what's remarkable. Despite one of the most thorough investigations in criminal history, despite thousands of pages of evidence, despite decades of additional scrutiny, Americans simply don't believe the official story. The numbers are staggering. A 2003 Fox News poll found that 66% of Americans suspected Oswald was part of a larger plot. 74% believed in a cover-up. A 2009 CBS poll showed 76% rejecting the lone gunman theory. A 2013 survey found 74% still believing in conspiracy. But here's the question that haunts this case. What kind of conspiracy? The theories vary wildly depending on your political perspective. Was it the Soviets, the Cubans, anti-Castro exiles, the mafia, the CIA, the military-industrial complex? Some combination of all of these? The beauty of the Kennedy assassination, from a conspiracy theorist's perspective, is that it can accommodate almost any theory. There are enough loose threads, enough unanswered questions, enough suspicious coincidences to support whatever narrative you prefer. Chief Justice Earl Warren himself may have inadvertently fed these theories. When asked early in the investigation whether all findings would be made public, Warren suggested that some information, particularly regarding national security, might remain classified indefinitely. He said the complete truth might not emerge in your lifetime. Warren was referring specifically to Oswald's contacts with Soviet and Mexican officials, information that was genuinely sensitive during the Cold War. But his words took on an ominous tone for conspiracy theorists. What was being hidden? Why couldn't Americans know the truth? This brings us to one of the most frustrating aspects of the Kennedy assassination, for researchers and the general public alike: the classified documents. Even after the JFK Records Act of 1992, which was supposed to open the government's files, significant documents remained secret. As of 2012, the National Archives estimated that less than 1% of relevant documents, under 50,000 pages out of approximately 5 million, would remain classified until 2017. But here's the kicker. The CIA has classified 1,171 documents as national security secrets, and many of these files are exactly what researchers most want to see. Professor Robert Blakey, who served as chief counsel for the congressional investigation into the assassination in the late 1970s, expressed deep frustration with this ongoing secrecy. He accused the CIA of manipulating the archives to maintain classification of documents that should be public. Think about this for a moment. We're talking about events that occurred 60 years ago during a Cold War that ended decades ago, involving people who are mostly dead. What could possibly still be so sensitive that it requires classification? This ongoing secrecy feeds conspiracy theories like oxygen feeds fire. Every classified document represents potential evidence of the cover-up that 3/4 of Americans believe occurred. Every redacted line suggests hidden truth. Every bureaucratic delay reinforces suspicion. Some files from Army intelligence and the Secret Service have been destroyed entirely. Others from naval intelligence are simply missing. Whether through incompetence or design, the documentary record of one of America's most important criminal investigations has been compromised. So why does any of this matter? Why should we care about a 60-year-old murder case that's been investigated more thoroughly than any crime in history? Because the Kennedy assassination represents a fundamental break in American society. The moment when a significant portion of the population stopped trusting official explanations for major events. The Warren Commission was supposed to restore confidence in American institutions. Instead, it became Exhibit A in the case against government credibility. The assassination occurred during the height of the Cold War, when nuclear annihilation seemed possible at any moment. Americans needed to believe their government could protect them, could find the truth, could maintain order in a chaotic world. When that faith was shaken, it never fully recovered. John F. Kennedy wasn't just a president. He was a symbol of hope for a new generation. His death at the hands of what appeared to be a marginal, disturbed individual seemed random, meaningless, absurd. A conspiracy, at least, would provide meaning, would suggest that his death served some purpose, however sinister. The lasting impact of this case extends far beyond questions about bullets and trajectories. It's about the relationship between citizens and their government, about the nature of truth in a democratic society, about what happens when official narratives fail to convince. That's our descent into the murky legacy of the Warren Commission, a government investigation meant to bring clarity, but instead left a nation with more shadows than answers. But this isn't just a story about bullets, trajectories, or redacted files. It's about how a moment in history can fracture trust, and how the institutions built to protect truth can sometimes become the gatekeepers of doubt. Yes, the Warren Commission produced thousands of pages of testimony and evidence, but what about the missing records, the witnesses who weren't called, the questions that were never truly asked, and the ones that still haunt us today? And maybe the bigger question is this: what happens when the official story stops making sense? Because when transparency is sacrificed for stability, truth becomes negotiable. When trust is broken, every answer becomes suspect. And when institutions fail to confront the uncomfortable, the public fills in the silence with theories, with fear, and sometimes with something closer to the truth. The Warren Commission is real, its report exhaustive, its conclusions contested, and its legacy still unfolding. To explore more of the evidence, declassified documents, alternate theories, and first-hand accounts we couldn't fully cover in today's episode, head over to the Skoob app for the extended investigation. Whether you're convinced by the lone gunman theory or believe in a broader conspiracy, one thing is clear. The story of JFK's assassination is far from settled. Download Skoob now on the App Store or Play Store. I'm your host, Oz Dalton. Thanks for walking this road of questions with me, and remember, in the search for truth, the most dangerous lie is the one we stop questioning. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay vigilant.